Dear students, I welcome you to this lecture. Today we'll be talking about grammar, passive voice. Now what is voice? Voice is the form a verb takes to indicate whether the subject of the verb performs or receives the action. The voice shows whether the subject is the performer or the receiver of the action. Now there are two types of voice, active voice and passive voice. The active voice, as you know, we have a subject in a sentence, we have a verb, we have the object. The subject of a sentence is the person or thing we talk about. When the subject does something, we use active voice. Take the sentence, for example, people speak English. People is the subject, and here, as you can see, people is the doer or the performer of the action. Speak is the verb. Now here it is the active verb. It can be in different tenses. Active verb shows action is being performed. Now English is the object or the receiver. Now active voice indicates that the subject of the verb is acting, it is performing, it is doing some action. Because the subject does or acts upon the verb in such sentences, the sentences are said to be in the active voice. Now let's see what is the passive voice. The passive voice is used when the subject is not the doer of an action. The subject is not the performer of an action. The subject is not doing something at all. It remains passive. We put the receiver of an action as the subject in this case. We put the doer of an action as the object. Take this sentence for example. English is spoken by people. English is the subject. However, here it is the receiver of the action. Is spoken is the passive verb. It can be in different tenses. It is an action which is being done, and people is the object. However, you can see that it is the doer, the performer of the action. The passive voice sentence, the subject and object flip-flop, that is, they interchange their position. The subject becomes the passive recipient of the action because the subject is being acted upon. It is passive. Such sentences are said to be in the passive voice. Now it brings us to how to change the active to the passive. You can see a few sentences over here. A chart is made. A chart was made. He made a chart. He makes a chart. Now, as you can see, the verb changes. It changes to be plus past participle. The past participle means the third form of the verb. But you can see from these two examples that the tense remains the same. The tense does not change. However, the verb changes. Same verbal tense of the active sentence. I'll be giving you a few examples here. We have taken to do as the active. So do or does changes to is, are done. Is, are doing changes to is, are being done. Has or have done changes to has, have been done. Was, were doing changes to was or were being done. Did changes to was or were done. Had done changes to had been done. As you can see, we are adding be plus past participle for the passive voice. The past participle, as I already told you, is the third form of the verb. Here I would like you to stop the video and go through all the sentences very thoroughly, very carefully, paying attention to how the active sentences are converted into the passive so that you will be able to attempt the exercises which are at the end of this lecture. Now, how do we use and when do we use the active voice? Most writers prefer to use active voice because it's more direct. It is emphatic, it's clear, it's concise, it's to the point, it's direct. I would like you to compare these two sentences. The active sentence states, the waiter dropped the tray of food. Now here we know who dropped the tray. We know who's responsible for the action. We know who is the performer of the action. The passive sentence, the tray of food was dropped by the waiter. So as you can see, the first one is more direct. It's clear, it's precise. The active voice is less awkward and clearly states a relationship between subject and action. I would like you to compare these two sentences. Passive sentence states, your request for funding has been denied by the review committee. The review committee denied your request for funding. The active voice sentence pattern propels the leader forward through your writing, thus avoiding weak prose. So if you use the active voice, your prose becomes strong, clear, and emphatic. Now, when do we use the passive voice? When the agent is not known. We don't know who stole the car. So the car was stolen. Number 2, when the agent is unimportant. English is spoken all over the world. So the agent is not important. We are not concerned with the agent, with the performer, with the doer of the action. Number 3, when more importance is to be given to the object. So the object is more important than the action, than the actor or the performer. America was discovered by Columbus. And number 4, when writing formal speeches or information such as headlines, rules, sign, media reports, etc. You must have seen this very commonly used for newspaper headlines. The terrorists were killed. In general, the passive voice is less direct, less forceful, less concise than the active voice. Use the passive voice in the following situations. Now, this is where you should be using the passive voice. It's better to use them in certain situations and circumstances. Use passive voice when you do not know or do not want to reveal the performer of an action. You want to keep his identity a secret. So it's a good idea to use the passive voice. When passive voice is used, when you want to emphasize the receiver of an action. So the receiver, the person who is receiving the action, the recipient is more important than the action itself. In that case, it's better to use the passive voice. Now here are a few examples. The first sentence is very awkward. My bicycle was repainted by John. Now it's very awkward. Why? Because we have put the agent at the last, but still we are mentioning him. So a deliberate passive would be, my bicycle was repainted. The performer is not mentioned. Why? Because the bicycle is important. We are not concerned with who repainted it. Verb plus preposition. Now in certain sentences you have the verb which are followed by prepositions. In such cases you have to bring the preposition followed by the verb whenever you change the active sentence to the passive. Take this example, for instance, a nurse looks after the COVID-19 patients. The COVID-19 patients are looked after by the nurse. So we are not going to omit after, it's going to be brought in the passive sentence also. Here are a few sentences which I would like you to practice. The Simpsons are eating cakes. Cakes are being eaten by the Simpsons. People light diyas at Diwali. Diyas are lit by people at Diwali. Practice, practice, and practice, because practice makes you perfect. I would like you to choose the correct option from the 4 options which are given here. The maid sweeps the room. The rooms. Next sentence. People buy some flowers. Some flowers. She paints a picture. A picture. The baker makes a cake. A cake. Juhi buys some new clothes. Some new clothes. The maid cleans the house. The house. Peter draws a car. Mr. and Mrs. Sharma bake a cake. Dear students, this brings us to the end of this lecture. I hope that your doubts regarding active and passive voice have been cleared and you would be able to convert any sentence to the passive voice and use active and passive voice effectively and efficiently. Thank you.